How's your voice feeling? I saw you in Milwaukee, and you'd lost your voice, but you're persevering.
Yeah, that sucked. I had a few days on that tour where I was pretty croaky, which luckily isn't a thing that usually happens to me. I remember back in my early touring days, I used to really push it too hard in terms of not getting enough sleep and maybe being too exuberant on stage. And I used to get sick during tours, but it's been a few years since that was an issue for me. So that was surprising to me that I had this lost voice situation in July. It wasn't even winter. But yeah, after a few days, it went away, and luckily hasn't returned.
Even without days off resting, you still just sang, persevered, and then kind of healed itself?
Yeah, well, I don't do days off on tours if I can help it. But I feel like on a tour, every day is essentially a day off because you're only on stage in the evening for some short period of time. So it's not as though you're working during the day. In a certain way, maybe you would say that a day of recording in a studio is more of a on day if you're actually or a rehearse. If you're rehearsing with a band, that's a circumstance where you might have to be playing and singing for a few hours. But a tour day is kind of you're only playing for one set.
It's all perspective. And this is a perspective I've never heard before, Jeffrey Lewis, but I like it. A show day is a day off. Because I think of it as hard work, but now that I think about it more, I'm not actually doing much at all.
Well, yeah, it's strangely exhausting, though it shouldn't be. I'm always confused. I'm like, why is this exhausting? I've just been sitting in a car. It's not like I've been lifting boxes all day.
Yeah, well, you put, I don't know how much pressure you put on yourself, but for instance, now I'm doing a support tour with this band, We Are Scientists. Easy, no pressure. You know how that goes. It's not your tour, so the no strain on your shoulders as much. But when it's my own tour, it's just so hard to relax. I'm like, oh, who's coming to the show tonight? Oh shit, we're playing Kansas City on a Tuesday. That is nothing really you can do about it. But I continue to beat my own ass up about it.
Well, that's what keeps it exciting. I mean, right, if you were to get too complacent about it, that would just be a whole different thing. I think the excitement of the nervousness every night, but I do completely understand that there's just a million tasks that need to be done. You make sure the right people are on the guest list. Is the merchandise table set up? Is the sound check working? What kind of set? I put a lot of pressure on myself to write these my whole set list process. So I kind of create in some ways more difficulty than necessarily needs to be. But there is all of that kind of daily stress of who's going to be at this show. Oh, my friends in such and such a band are going to be here. I have to remember to give them a shout out on stage tonight. So there's and then every day I kind of try to keep on top of the just the paperwork. While I'm in the car, if I'm not driving, I want to just kind of log in all the info of what were the ticket sales last night, how much money have we spent today, how much money have we made today, did I pay the bandmates, is everybody paid out properly for merch, are we up to date? So there's a lot of little tasks.
It's a lot of missions. So you've never really had a tour manager. You're always just I'm going to do it. I'll do the tour management.
Yeah, I mean, there's no... I guess if I was making gazillions of dollars, then maybe that would be a different story. But there's no big... it's just someone's got to do it. So, and I kind of I feel comfortable being aware of the details of what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of your formula for just being in the game for so long and, having a sustainable career. And, you've been doing this longer than I have. So I definitely look to you as there's an example of someone that is doing it. It is possible. You can do it on your own steam. And I'm sure there's, a lot of people around the country and around the world who are all right, thank God it's actually possible,
That was a revelation to me, the fact that it was possible. And I really got that idea from the book, Our Band Could Be Your Life, the Michael Azerrad book that came out exactly when I started getting involved in the idea of touring. That although various people were giving me the sense that it wasn't possible or that it was too difficult or that it's you can't be a creative artist and also deal with those organizational things. It's too much to deal with. But that book came out right around then, and I was just so fascinated by that book. And it kind of tells the story. There's like one chapter on Black Flag, one chapter on Sonic Youth, one chapter on the Minutemen. It sort of just goes through chapter by chapter all these different bands in the 80s and how they kind of, just up by their own bootstraps made certain things happen, from releasing their own albums, booking their own tours, and how things developed. And I was like, oh, you can do it. It is possible. In fact, all these great bands did it. So, yeah, that was a good inspiration for me to let me know that it was possible.
What's the book called?
Our Band Could Be Your Life.
Okay, I've seen this on shelves. I got to read it.
Yeah, no, it's a must-read, I think. I mean, it's that title is a quote from a Minutemen song, and the Minutemen chapter was especially inspirational because they really kind of in a certain way invented all these ethics of how to be a touring working class band, and kind of really dialed into that identity in a way that is pretty fun, and like it just kind of gives you a sense that like, okay, there is a way of being, and they are one of the architects of that way of being for an independent band.
Can you think of examples as to what that architecture kind of looked like? How did they keep people involved without a huge infrastructure or team? How did they keep people's interest?
Well, what we were talking about earlier about Days Off, they have all these. Mike Watt, the bass player, comes up with all these funny phrases that are memorable, and he says, "If you ain't playing, you're paying," for one thing. And just the idea that it was like cool to do it on the cheap, just having, cutting the corners that are possible to save, where there's savings to be made. Like you're out there to make money rather than lose money. And I don't know. It's been a long time since I read the book. I would like to reread it now and see what my impressions of it would be returning to it 22 years later, and see how, it was such a revelation to me at the time. I wonder what I would think of it if I revisit it.
Yeah, I think when you think of like, your musical elders or your heroes in any capacity, whatever you do for a living, there's always like this mythicalness put around it. Like they've tapped into something that you can't do. They have infrastructure, they have resources you don't have, and that's how they did it. But if you really want to hone in and dig deep, it's like they just grinded just like the next person, and then later steps is when maybe help comes a little bit. But
yeah,
I'm
still waiting for that later step.
Yeah,
but I got a huge leg up in the industry by being able to. Nothing would have happened for me at all if the signing to Rough Trade in 2001 really gave me a career, because I was just playing at open mics and putting out my own cassettes prior to that, and suddenly the fact that there was a label interested in me, I never would have had the gumption to send my stuff out to labels. It was just a very lucky fluke that really changed my life completely. That, okay, there was a label that wanted to put my stuff out, and that just put me in this position where I was like, okay, well, now I can, I had this, this little moment of opportunity where it was like, I could try to book tours and be like, well, I have this official album, I don't really know. And I imagine I probably may not have ever gone into that zone of touring and making, being more in the public eye, if this very unexpected event of having the opportunity to put an album out on a label.
And this is like prime label era still, 2001.
Yeah, it was just prior to at that time you were still selling physical albums, CDs were selling, you were looking at your record label accounting statement to see how many CDs sold in each 6-month period, and it was like the sort of last vestige of the old industry.
Well, how great, to get a part of that, and just being introduced to thousands of people just through, even just zines, magazines, those were still a thing.
Yeah.
So, and taken very seriously from what I remember. I remember anytime you saw, a band in what were they, Rolling Stone, Enemy, that carried a lot of weight, It was like, holy shit, larger than life kind of.
And Enemy was a weekly publication, so that gave a lot of artists an opportunity to be featured. which I think in some ways really was such a difference in the English music scene versus the American music scene, which was like a fascinating thing for me to be a part of and like witness.
Because Rough Trade's a London-based label?
Yeah. So that like introduced me to that whole world of like British music press, of which NME, which no longer exists like that now, but during that time, it was a really important magazine where people would like find out about stuff. And every week there was a new issue of NME, and some new band would be on the cover, and they'd have new features, and here's who's on tour, and here's these new albums, and here's interviews, and so that's 4 times as many opportunities to be featured every month versus Rolling Stone or Spin that comes out once a month. So that's a lot of exposure, and it creates this very exciting, frothy scene where bands are coming up and things are, it just kind of speeds up the entire excitement process of the British music scene. And then you also had things like the John Peel show that I had an opportunity to play on back in my just starting out in 2002, which was huge exposure for all of England. That, John Peel would have bands do live sets on his program on the BBC, which was national exposure in England. And he was very interested in putting unusual artists on there. He was not waiting for people to really establish themselves in the industry. If something struck him as interesting, he would just give you a chance to come on and play a set on the air. And that was a huge just foot in the door for me in England that gave me a lot of exposure, and also just opened up some of those doors to allow me to book more shows.
So as this is happening and these kind of big doors start to open, are you aware that it's like a window in time where you're like, okay, I gotta jump on this? I don't know how far into your career you are in this point or how old you are, or is it just a thing where you're like, holy shit, was it a whirlwind, or was it like, did you have your head on your shoulders?
Well, it was a whirlwind, but it was also like I didn't have my head on my shoulders in a conventional professional way, because I was extremely unprofessional, but that was part of what I was doing anyway, because Daniel Johnston was always my biggest inspiration, that this idea that you could just be very unprofessional, you could be very warts and all unpolished, you could make mistakes, you could screw up, maybe you messed up how you played the guitar part, maybe your voice wasn't great, maybe you were kind of didn't have the most confident stage presence or whatever it was, but you could you were not trying to be the Rolling Stones, you were just sort of a bedroom recording artist doing something that was more in line with the kind of independent comic book scene that I was, I was always into just drawing comic books, and that kind of personal approach to it that is kind of outside the professional, almost more like thinking of music as a documentary rather than thinking of it as a Hollywood production. So I had no interest in even trying to be Radiohead or Elliott Smith or any of these polished things. It was like, the more messy and screwed up and like obviously amateurish I am, that is part of what is interesting to me about music. So I had these opportunities, and I had opportunities to open up. I was opening up for Corner Shop. They asked me to do a tour opening for them, which I was way out of my league, playing these big venues, and I was just completely inexperienced. And, did I even know what a monitor was? Did I know what a sound check was? Did I... it was a real trial by fire, and I screwed up quite a lot. But these opportunities, including the Peel session and whatever else, there wasn't a contradiction between like my artistic identity and the fact that I was like maybe screwing up some of these opportunities a bit. It was like, oh, here's this guy.
Very few genres you can really get away with that in.
Right.
So
you can't do that in.
Yeah.
Right. You can't be a lo-fi ballet dancer, I think. Or maybe you can be, or an opera singer or something, or a jazz musician that screws up. Like that's a contradiction to the aesthetic. But when you're coming from like, if you're into like, whatever it is, Beat Happening, Jonathan Richman, old, Yo La Tengo, stuff that's like, it's all right that people see the brush strokes and they see that this is just a person making stuff that they're passionate about. Sebado, these lo-fi home recordings. And of course, Daniel Johnston is my major, by far, like 100 times more than anything else. That was like my guiding principle.
Any new kind of lo-fi? Who's the young Daniel Johnston these days?
I don't know. But certainly discovering the Sidewalk Cafe over here on Avenue A, a couple blocks away from here. That whole scene, which they were calling the anti-folk scene, when I started hanging out there and seeing some of those acts that were playing there, that gave me a lot of inspiration. A band called Pre-War Yard Sale. Originally, it was Mike Reckner playing solo, and he became a huge inspiration to me. And then he formed a duo with his wife, Dina, and they called themselves Pre-War Yard Sale. And that was lo-fi, simple, raw stuff that really informed my approach and really gave me a lot of things to think about in terms of what you could do as what constituted a song, what could be a performance, what could be an artistic mode. And that stuff is like really foundational to me also. Of course, they're not known even in New York City, or that's a very esoteric reference, but there are people that are fans of theirs, and once in a while there's certain people that I'm friends with that like understand what the importance of that band and like what was cool about that band, that like relate to me when I think that they're like the greatest or one of the great
I'll check them out.
bands.
And for people who don't know, the Sidewalk Cafe scene in New York City, that was kind of famous for, I guess you'd say the bands like Moldy Peaches. Who else came out of there? Like Interpol or?
Well, not Interpol. 'Cause it was not really designed for bands. It's like an open mic scene that was mostly geared towards acoustic stuff. It didn't have like a kind of rock club infrastructure, although band performances would happen there during the week. But you didn't get a sound check. Every band that played there, you would just get on stage and play. There was no such thing as sound checks there. And most of the people who were getting booked there were getting booked because they had generated some interest at the open mic nights on Mondays.
Okay.
So it was like if you played a couple open mic nights and it was like, wow, this person's doing something interesting. Do you want to play a set here on, Thursdays sometime or something, So it was like the open mic was like your kind of audition in a certain way, where if you became part of the scene in that way, then you could graduate to getting the opportunity to play 30-minute sets. And then if you were kind of doing that for a while, they might give you a 60-minute set. And if you were doing all right on Wednesdays and Thursdays, maybe they'd give you a Friday or Saturday. And it was kind of a whole little stepping stone structure in the Sidewalk, which was great for anybody starting out.
What was like the merch like? I imagine that was kind of cool. Are people making their own like cassettes and zines and trading them and
Yeah,
shirts?
There was a really important zine called Antimatters that was the zine of the anti-folk scene, and it was monthly. And yeah, it was just this way to feel like you were part of something, because you could get interviewed in the Antimatter zine, or you could interview somebody else. If you thought there was some new person that you saw playing at Sidewalk and you thought what they were doing was cool or interesting, you could be like, hey, I'd like to interview you. And then you would just type it up and give it to the guy who put together the Antimatter zine. Or people would write reviews of the shows going on there, or album reviews. So it was its own whole little world. And the Antimatter zine was a huge element in that. It made you feel like, oh, I'm getting press. I'm getting, even though it was like all happening in this tiny cafe.
It's encouraging.
It was really encouraging and great. And in a certain way, it created an atmosphere where you didn't feel like you had to go outside of that. It didn't really enter my mind and a lot of people's minds that you sort of felt like you had everything you needed there. Friends, people to watch at gigs, people will come watch you.
Sure.
And you could get your album reviewed and get interviewed and whatever, all right there. And who cared if the New York Times had no idea that existed, or if anybody in New York had any idea that existed. Touring and playing in other clubs didn't really enter the picture. But when the Moldy Peaches showed up on the scene, they really immediately kind of expanded and exploded the parameters, because they were, well, first of all, they were a little more experienced because they had already kind of established themselves on the West Coast a little bit. Not like they were a very professional outfit. They were super lo-fi and super fun, and they just immediately started generating a fan base that like became much wider than the Sidewalk little internal bubble. So they started playing some other places and getting a lot of attention that was like a different sort of attention than us at Sidewalk had been used to. And then they actually signed to Rough Trade and started touring England and Europe and getting like, full features in some of these magazines. And that kind of opened a lot of doors to a lot of other people at Sidewalk to kind of start thinking about, oh my God, I want to do that too. I want to tour, or and it also created a context where the other people could pitch themselves to, somebody could go and book gigs in Germany and be like, hey, I'm part of the anti-folk scene, like just like the Moldy Peaches, or it really like it just opened a door for everybody at Sidewalk to kind of jump on that bandwagon and get a little attention.
It's really nice for bands to fit in a really specific niche. Even if it's not a huge genre, I think that's one thing that's just been awesome, for you and some of the bands you tour with. It's just like people who love anti-folk, that's just their shit,
I don't know if there's people who love anti-folk. That's like a very, that's like.
There certainly are all over the weird nooks and crannies of Europe. I've witnessed it.
Yeah. Well, basically what they're saying is they love the Moldy Peaches, and that's, because the Moldy Peaches are a limited resource, the supply and demand is such that they want more of the, greatness and enjoyment that they get from the Moldy Peaches, but since the Moldy Peaches aren't there, and there's only one Moldy Peaches album, and there's, they'll have to put up with seeing person X, Y, and Z. Sort of filling in that missing gap. The same way in the 60s, there was only one Beatles, but they couldn't be everywhere all the time, and they couldn't release a new album every week. So you have, I don't know, the Dave Clark Five and the Beau Brummels and 10,000 other bands that are sort of like providing some of that thrill.
And you can have quick success channeling like a legendary band.
Yeah.
It's much easier than, going the long road and like being your own weird little entity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I obviously benefited tremendously from suddenly there was a context in which people could understand what I was doing because they were like, oh, he's sort of like the Moldy Peaches. Luckily for me, I was around before them, so I feel like I kind of escape from the threat of being like, oh, he's just copying them, because like I at least have the cred of like I was there first and I'm still doing my thing. But they were an undeniable influence on everybody. I mean, the whole scene just was like, oh, that, it kind of sparked a lot of copycat stuff all over Europe also. I mean, England and Europe, a lot of bands were coming out that were trying to sound like them.
Did you get anywhere weird on tour this year? I think you had a pretty big touring year. You were in Europe, you were in the UK, USA. Any weird spots?
Let me think. I guess nothing like super weird. I mean, at some point you had mentioned the idea of touring in South Africa as a thing, and that's like fascinating to me. I would love to be able to go someplace totally off the beaten path, at least as what I consider the beaten path of Europe and America and England.
John Shaban and I can certainly tee that up for you. You're not going to make suitcases of money, but
yeah, but no, it would just be amazing. It would just be incredible to see some totally different areas. But yeah, no, I love being able to just see the U.S. and see Europe and see England and Ireland and Scandinavia. I mean, that's basically Europe. But yeah, sometimes in my life there's been these chances to go like outside of that Western world a little bit. I mean, some China stuff, or Australia, which is basically the Western world, but it's pretty far flung. New Zealand. But yeah, none of that happened this year. I mean, I haven't done one of those sorts of trips in a while, but it's just exciting enough to be running around anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you're still so pumped about it, It you don't seem to get fatigued ever.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm like fatigued, but pumped also. I'm the fatigue is not, the fatigue is just like this weird thing where when I'm on tour, I'm just like, why am I tired? I was only on stage for, an hour and 15 minutes. Like, why should I need to take a nap during the day?
Well, your brain never turns off,
Yeah, it's somehow mysteriously exhausting.
Yeah.
Even though it doesn't seem like it should be to me, because I'm just like, there's not that much physical labor involved.
Are you good friends with your brain, would you say?
No, my brain hates me. That's a big that's always an issue.
And has that relationship between you and your brain gotten any better over the years, or is it just constantly in flux?
It's, I guess it's in flux. I don't know. Is it like that for everybody? Well, I don't know. Maybe people have certain philosophical or religious structures that compartmentalize things so they're not like always in the ring with their brain in that way. But I just read a great novel, a Swedish novel from 1905 called Dr. Glass, where there's all these great philosophical asides, and one of the images in the book is the guy talks about how thoughts are like an acid that's just constantly eating away in your brain, and you think that you're going to be able to utilize thoughts to help you with things and have it attack and dissect the things that are
God damn it. All right. As you were.
and have thoughts dissect and attack the things that you want to dismantle, but thoughts aren't controllable and tameable in that way. Thoughts will just keep on eating away at everything, and it's just this constantly eating acid in your brain. And I think that that's really a great description.
Thoughts aren't great, or too many thoughts.
Well, it's just a constant process. You got to give it something to work on, something productive to work on. Otherwise, it's just going to be working on you and working on something. And I used to have this, I mean, before I read this great description of thoughts as this like churning mental acid, which I'm not paraphrasing correctly, and I lent the book to my dad, so I don't have it here to read the exact quote. But I, for years, have had my own metaphor for it, where I feel like it's like those rodents that they have to constantly be eating, carrots and chewing on cardboard and stuff because their teeth just keep on growing and they'll grow through their skulls and kill them. Or at least that's the urban legend, that if you have a hamster or a guinea pig or a rat or something, they have to constantly be chewing on something. Otherwise, they have to keep their teeth worn down. Otherwise, they're going to damage or kill themselves.
Satanic shit.
So I don't know if that's scientifically true or if that's just an urban legend. But I feel like that was my metaphor for thought. It's like I have to be working on a project. I have to be thinking about something constructive, putting all of because the thoughts don't stop. It's like the rodent teeth that keep growing.
I relate to that so much.
Yeah, that's put it towards some. It's this constant thing that's hammering away. So you want to give it something to hammer away at, so it's not hammering away at you.
I think that's where relationships are so great. Even on like a base level, you just have less time in your own own
100%.
head.
Yeah, it pulls you out of your head. It's very healthy.
And I think if you don't have that creative outlet, that can be an issue. There's nowhere for those thoughts to go.
Yeah, but I guess, I don't know. There's 8 billion humans on the earth, and they all have thoughts all day long, every day. So they all have some way of coping. I guess religion solves that for a lot of people, maybe. Or I guess if you have a family, I mean, you're just too busy. If you have, kids to take care of, and you have all these responsibilities, you probably wish you had more time alone with your thoughts.
Have you ever gone down any religious eras?
No, I've just always, my family's been atheist for generations, so it never, I never had to confront my own feelings about that. I never had to realize that there's no God. I never had to realize there's no Santa Claus, any of this stuff. It was just kind of, as long as I can remember, that was just the reality that I was brought up with. And that was the same for my parents and my parents' parents. It's just, and aunts and uncles and everything. It's just deeply ingrained atheism.
So what happens if you're, let's say you and your brain are not on good terms, and at the same time, none of your creative juices are flowing, and what do you do then?
Well, I don't think I'm against the idea. I've come around at some point in my life to being against the idea of this flowing creative juices thing. You do it. It's like playing basketball or anything. You just get in the game. It's like you're either doing it or you're not doing it. If you're sitting around waiting for it to happen to you, that's not going to happen. Or if it does happen,
legend.
It's like it's rare that happens. And Stephen King just writes 9 to 5. That's just his job. He writes every day. That's his job, and therefore he finds inspiration. He doesn't wait for it to come to him. And I think that that's the way that all creative people work and function, and it's just a matter of how much you do that. And the people that do that more find more inspiration. And I find that to be true because I force myself to write a song for the open mic each week. I sort of, that's like my deadline. I'm like, Monday's coming up. I haven't written a song yet this week. I need to have a new song for the open mic. Nobody there cares, and nobody in the world cares, but I just use that as an arbitrary deadline for myself, and it seems impossible every time. There's no way I'm going to be able to write a song. I have nothing to say. I have no inspiration, or this is just going to suck. I'm just going to write a really stupid song. But somehow, every time, there's something interesting. You start working on it, and you sort of find something interesting to get involved with, even though you don't want to transition into that mode. It's like annoying and painful to force yourself into a creative mode and look at that blank page and try to turn it into something. But yeah, it seems to me that you just have to do it. You just do it the same way you go to the gym, or the same way that you do anything, the same way you clock in at an office.
And do you have go-to people you go to for criticism about your work?
Well, the open mic in a certain way, I could say, because it's a room full of strangers and nobody's there to see me, and if the song that I've just written seems to connect in some way, if somebody comes up and says, hey, that was a cool song, or if it seems like even just in myself, if I feel like I'm cringy playing it, if I just realize how bad it sucks while I'm playing it in front of people versus feeling like, oh, this is actually pretty good, like I feel like I've got something good to present, that teaches me something also. So that's really my critical filter immediately, because I'll write the song, I'll play it at the open mic and see how it feels to play it in front of people that have no invested interest in necessarily liking it. It's and then beyond that, I might try playing a song at a gig if I feel really good about it. If it might try playing it for my bandmates to see if they might have an interest in figuring out how to turn it into a full band song. But all of that is pretty rare. Most of the songs that I write don't make it to that phase. Like, most of the songs I write are not going to be part of my shows, and they're not going to be presented to my bandmates.
Do you just throw them
options.
in the trash, or you put them on a Patreon, or you do anything with them?
For years, I didn't do anything with them. I just accumulated them. But since the pandemic, I've been experimenting with putting them out on Bandcamp. At the end of each year, I'll put out a collection of here's all the songs that I recorded. Here's a little home recorded demos from this year. So that's been, 4 years basically of doing that. I don't know if that's a good idea or not to put out all this stuff, but I've been debating whether I'm going to do that again this year. I do have a pile of these songs that I wrote this year for the open mic. Some of these songs I like a little better than others. And I'm like, am I going to keep up now the pandemic is basically over, in the sense that we can tour and play gigs again?
And Bandcamp's an interesting platform because it's like, it is almost one of those places where like people go to find lo-fi music or weird kind of nerd rock. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
I don't know. I don't know who is on there looking for stuff.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure how much you explored in there. I just kind of like throw stuff on there and forget it. But if you do explore as a listener, it's got a lot of cool features. You can search by city, which you can't do on Spotify, I don't think. So you can be like weird lo-fi, freak folk, Chicago, and that's kind of a neat thing. And it's just, I found some pretty cool stuff on there.
Now, is that because I don't, well, maybe I do tag stuff on Bandcamp. I don't remember if, lo-fi, freak folk, Chicago, is that because the band themselves is identifying themselves with that, with hashtags or some method of tagging?
The band makes the hashtags, and then there's all these tabs that you can search by city.
Yeah. I guess I must do that whenever I do the process of uploading and putting something on Bandcamp. I'm just trying to remember. That doesn't ring a bell to me at the moment because I don't know how. I guess I would just say lo-fi, anti-folk, folk, acoustic, New York City, home recordings. I would just do it like that, and but I'm not expecting. It never occurs to me at all that some total stranger is going to stumble on that stuff. I don't imagine that happens, or it would be very rare if it does happen.
What's your like best-selling merch item outside of like physical music? I know you make comic books. Obviously, you've got a million different shirts from over the years. Anything else that's been
like at a gig? You mean?
Yeah. Or online?
Well, online, the poster that I did that has all the David Berman Silver Jews and Purple Mountain songs illustrated into it, that's been a pretty regular seller off my website. And I think that that's like not necessarily fans of mine. I feel like there's people that are Silver Jews fans that have heard of this poster and they want to get it, or I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of people that are on my website and they only buy that and they're not looking for my records or my shirts or my comic books. So that, I'm not told. I would have to look into my website data, but I would almost guess that maybe the last few years, maybe that's the top selling item each year, that particular poster. But the comic book collection that I sell, that I put together during the pandemic, that's like all 13 issues of my comic book series. And I now have started this new comic series. So that's kind of like the complete series of the previous series. And it's not an actual book. It's just, I can grab one of these here from the helpful box over here.
We're here live from the Jeffrey Lewis Distribution Center in Manhattan, New York.
Yes.
You've got towers of records lining the walls.
Man, I've got so much of my own. Well, right. I mean, there's my record collection, but there's also my own merchandise, which fills all these closets. I could give you a look inside the horror show of all my closets full of merch.
It's like being inside your brain.
Yeah, basically. So this collection has been a big seller.
Oh, cool, man.
And that's all 13 issues basically just in a bag, but with a new cover that I drew. And that's been... yeah, I don't know. Again, I would have to really look at the data to see if I'm really accurate in that. Like,
this is every comic you've ever made?
No, there's other comics that I did prior to this series, and there's other comics that I've done since this series. But this particular series, Fuff Comics, a nonsense title, had a total of 13 issues. Well, there's 12 issues, plus there was an issue 0. So all 13 of those are in this. So it's not one story. Each issue has a few different stories. Like, some of it connects and most of it doesn't. So there's no reason to read them all in a bunch, but people like the idea of getting the complete series. And it's it's like a discounted item. Like, it's much cheaper to buy it in one chunk. And it's just a cool thing, I guess. Cool. So,
do you go to do you participate in like the Comic-Con world, comic conventions, or do you just kind of sell this alongside your records at shows?
It's mostly.
And do people find your music through the comic book scene?
I don't know. I probably not often. It's much more likely that somebody is a music fan and then they check out my comic books. I don't think there's that many people that are buying my comics in stores and then saying, oh, this person also makes music, let me check that out. Mm-hmm. I have better store distribution now for my comics than I used to just in the past year. So maybe that would almost be a thing, but I'm unaware of it. Like, I don't know how many people are walking into a comic store and buying my comic. It would be nice if there was a reality where somebody's going to walk into a comic store, see my comic, purely think of it as like, oh, cool, what is this interesting comic? Buy this thing, get into the comics, buy more of my comics, and then say, oh, I think this guy also makes music. Let me check that out. Yeah. But that is not, I don't think that is the world that I'm currently living in. Yeah. But with this Better Store distro deal that I currently have, maybe that could become a thing.
Well, Better Store, are they just like an indie comic book distributor? Or?
Well, when I started my new series, which is also, I'll grant, since we're, I'm going to walk off camera for a moment.
You got enough leash there.
So yeah, I started this new series, and I just put out issue number 2. So this is issue number 1 and 2 of the new series. Statics is the title of the new series, and when I started making this new series, I did send it out to a bunch of comic book publishers before I printed it myself, just on the off chance that somebody might be interested. And much to my surprise, one of the only companies that I heard back from was the best company in the world, Fantagraphics. I would have expected that maybe some smaller company might have bothered to get back to me, but Fantagraphics actually did write back, and I ended up working out a deal with them where they are willing to include this comic in their own distribution sort of package. So stores that are looking at what comics are coming out next month that we're going to stock in our store. So retailers look at these catalogs, and when they look at the Fantagraphics comics page of that catalog, they're like, oh, here's a new Dan Clowes book, here's a new Love and Rockets book, here's these other new Fantagraphics projects, and here's this comic called Statics. Let me order some of those. Because it sort of is appearing under the umbrella banner of here's a Fantagraphics thing, even though they're not publishing it, and I'm printing it, and I have all the boxes of it in my apartment. But because they were willing to distribute it under their banner, it gives me a
it gets into shops.
It really because it's I couldn't have picked a better.
And that was just a cold email.
Yeah, that
nice.
was.
Isn't it amazing when a cold email just lands?
I basically have never. I almost never have the guts to do that.
I've given up.
Yeah, it's I spent so many years not doing that with my comics. I was just like, you know what? When I'm good enough, somebody will come to me. But this was since I was starting the new series. I was kind of like, yeah, let me for once just reach out to everybody and just let them know that I exist.
And did you notice, did sales double? Just boosted a little bit?
No, it sold a lot more than I thought. Well, it's not like regular sales. It's just one big thing. It's like when it appears in the catalog, it only appears for 1 month in the catalog, and then the distributor says, please send us 800 copies of this comic because that's the number of orders that we got, and that's it. And then you put the next issue comes out a year later. I put out a new issue. It would be nice if I put a new issue out every month or every 2 months, but it takes me, with all the other stuff I'm doing, it's been a year. Then I put out the second issue, and then once again I was like, are you willing to put this in your catalog again? And they said yes. So once again it was in the catalog, and then and then I get the message like, please send whatever it is, 800 copies of this to the distributor.
That's the biggest, heaviest lift for all artists is distribution. It feels like. So if you got that, I mean, making art is easy compared to distributing it.
Yeah, especially for a physical. There's no streaming. The way that music has shifted, the physical distribution is less important because you can do stuff on Bandcamp and Spotify and whatever that doesn't require physical distribution of CDs and vinyl.
If you're a band, you gotta make stuff beyond just music. I feel like you gotta have things to sell.
Yeah,
beyond just
shirts.
Shirts are great,
and
but...
all these. Right. So that's right. With the comics, it really lives or dies on that. That distribution is so important in a way that it more so than music physical items.
What about? I mean, you're a really visual artist, which I love, and it's part of the thing that I think drew me to you, and a lot of people get turned on to your stuff. I love your banner or your projector at shows. It's something I want to try to do someday. How much of a pain in the ass is it? How much extra work is it to set up? What's the cost involved? How much art do you have to make to keep the banner going? You have like a visual light show behind you. Is it timed out to songs? I'm asking you way too many questions at once, but tell people about the banner. So, it's a huge visual ad.
Yeah, it's a big part of what I do, and it is a little hard for me to... Once in a while, I do shows without the visual stuff, but I feel like it's important to present the visual side of what I do in a concert. So because I've been so devoted to making comic books my whole life, it's such a part of my identity that... I always want to try to make that clear in the concerts that, in a certain way, I'm not a musician. You're not hearing the songs of a musician. You're hearing the songs of a comic book artist. I kind of think that is a better way to describe my artistic identity.
And as a showgoer, just to explain to the people, Jeff will put pages of the comic book up live. You're singing along to the song while your band plays, and you're basically paging through the pages.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to walk off screen for a moment, so I'll show you.
Okay. Drum roll.
Yeah. So, and this all evolved. This is another thing. This is another thing that evolved out of my time at the Sidewalk open mic nights, because I was always trying to come up with weird things to do at the open mics in the late 90s and early 2000s, and one of the things that I came up with was, what if instead of playing guitar while I sang a song, what if I had illustrations that I was showing? So I started doing these illustrated songs, and it seemed to work pretty well because I had the skills of telling a story and illustrating stuff. So this just went on and on and on, and I've made dozens and dozens and dozens of these.
Nice.
And it's this thing where, I draw them with crayons, like yay big, and as I'm singing, they will... I'll just be singing into a mic while flipping through the pages while my band is playing the backing music. So this was...
So you scan these, 11 by 17 drawings and put them on a projector, basically? Or you put them into a MacBook and...
For years, I was just presenting the books in my concerts, and during every concert, I would show 2 or 3 of these. I'd do a few songs, and then I'd show one of these books, and then I'd do a few more songs, and then show another book. But that only works for, concerts of a certain size.
Oh, I love the Keith Haring one.
Yeah, these are...
I did not know about him until you did this song.
Yeah, well, these are very educational for me because it's like when I research a topic, if it's something historical rather than something fantastical, I'm going to learn a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and then I'm going to present it to the audience like a book report, sort of. So these are obviously only going to be seen by an audience of 50 to 100 people maximum. They were perfect at Sidewalk Cafe because there's 50 people in that room. But once I started touring and having the opportunities to open up for bigger bands, by the time it was 2005, 2006, and I was touring, opening up for this band, The Cribs, and I was like, the books are just not cutting it. Like, if I'm in a room where there's 400 people, 600 people, 800 people, it's just not good. It's like the first 50 people see it, and then the other 500 people don't. So that was the first time that I looked into getting a projector and figuring out how to turn this into something that could be seen by more people in a room. And it really loses some of the charm when it's a projection versus showing these actual raggedy crayon books that I'm flipping through, because the books are so lo-fi and so homemade and so tactile in a way that is so different from the kind of digital CGI entertainment that people are used to. It really gives somebody something much more homemade to look at. But the projections were just a necessary step in being able to play bigger shows. And
I love that, man. I think that's such a rad, one up to the show.
Yeah, it really adds a little something to my gigs. And I've gone through a few projectors over the years. They don't last forever. So I've had 4 different projectors.
You have to bring a screen, right?
Well, I bring a bed sheet.
Okay, you just hang a bed sheet behind the stage.
I'll come back in a moment again.
Highly visual episode.
Yeah. So
lovely. And do you ever play? What do you do if you play like an outdoor show? Do you bring a thing to hang it on, or do you just have to sacrifice no banner, no visuals at some shows?
Yeah, it's a challenge every single show that I play. Every city, every environment, every stage, every club, every festival. I show up there and I'm like, how am I going to make it work here? And sometimes it's very challenging. Sometimes I'm like, oh, God, this is... All right, I'm going to have to climb up on this thing and then, try to hammer the screen in over there, or, damn it, this would be perfect, but they have this freaking sculpture hanging here that's blocking my access. Can I ask the guy if I can move that over and, risk death climbing up on these boxes or, a ladder or...
I mean, it must add at least an hour of pre-production.
That usually is a more intensive and difficult thing than the sound check itself. Just figuring out how I'm going to make the visuals work in any given environment. And sometimes it just isn't possible. There's a lot of times, like you're saying, a daytime festival set, we're playing 2 p.m. on an outdoor stage, and the projector's just not going to work. Or the setup of the stage itself just does not allow, there's just no place to do it. So that happens. And so that maybe that's a show where I just don't do the visuals. Yeah. Or maybe I show the book and I'm like, all right, at least even if only the first batch of people in the front can see it, at least other people are aware that there's something going on that's interesting and weird. It can be a great tool to bring people forward. If you're playing a big space and you show the book, everybody's like steps forward so they can see it. So it does help draw the audience to me. I carry around these like sorts of clips to clip the sheet to stuff. And I've got this bed sheet, this bed sheet is very easy to carry. It's very lightweight. I've gone through a bunch of these over the years. This one I actually bought from a fabric supply company that makes fireproof sheets, because certain venues, I was realizing that I would encounter situations where I'd show up and try to hang a sheet, and they'd say, "Is that fire safety approved?" And I'm like, "No, it's just a bed sheet."
Yeah.
And they would give me grief about that, and I would have to hassle with the manager.
Don't
and blah
want
blah
to
blah.
pull a white. What's the
Yeah.
band? White Shark. Great White.
Was that
blew
it?
up the nightclub.
Yeah. When they were trying to show their comic book projections.
Yeah, exactly. Gotta have
So
fireworks.
this is a fireproof certified sheet that I've been carrying that I bought from some special fabric manufacturer company in New Jersey, and I even have the certification sheet. You know, like if anybody is like, "Hey, is that fireproof?" I'm like, "Yes, I have the official."
That's a comic book right there. Jeffrey
sheet.
Lewis versus the fire marshal.
Yeah, that's one aspect of that stuff.
Tell me about. I don't think we talked about this last time, but it seems like your stuff would fit amazing in Japan. Has that been a place where you've had any success?
Never been to
Really?
Japan.
Okay,
I would
all
love
right.
to go to Japan. That would be incredible. But that opportunity has never come up.
Okay.
And I don't know how to make that happen. It's like if somebody invited me, if some festival was like, "Get out here," that would be great.
It's one of those weird places where the gatekeepers really run the show. It's
Oh,
not
yeah.
like a DIY place where you can kind of penetrate,
Yeah, I don't know. I know people that have toured there, so I feel like if I wanted to make a project out of it, I could hit them up for some contacts and try to work on it. But it's an undertaking.
Yeah.
If I was just going to start from scratch, that would be quite an undertaking. But maybe it's not a bad idea to just do that once, just so I try. But yeah,
Mexico, you ever play Mexico?
no, that would be cool too.
you
I've
have,
fantasized about that.
I got a good buddy who runs like tours down there, like acoustic tours. I don't know, give me your Spotify Mexico data, and I'll send it to you.
Right. Well, that's one of the interesting things about this digital realm is you can find out what your listenership is in that way.
Pretty cool. Yeah. Well, nice, Jeffrey Lewis. We've been riffing almost a good hour. It's been great to come visit you in your little house in Manhattan here.
Well, I'm glad you
What
got
a
some
town.
visuals in here. I didn't even
Oh.
realize it was going to be filmed. So, you get to get some of the visual stuff in here.
Hell of a town. I can't believe you get to live down here in the belly of the rock and roll beast. It's so fun down here, man.
Yeah, I don't know how rock and roll it is in this day and age, but it's certainly got an atmosphere that I appreciate, and
As a little man from Milwaukee, I'm like, everything's blown my mind. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, no, it's great. I don't know, and most of the musicians and bands probably, everybody's in Brooklyn these days, but no, it's still great around here, and I love New York City.
Oh, well, I love New York. Love you, man. Thanks for hosting. Let's go out with a song. I want to try my new applause button. Yay, yay, yay. What song should we do? We'll play off the track. I'm not going to make you play live.
Sure, all right. Well, I don't know. Whatever you think is appropriate to the conversation here. I'll think about it.
All right. See you, Jeffrey Lewis.